Hi, everybody. I'm Randy Bach, and today is March 28th, pretty much all day, so enjoy it. I'm here with Scott McKay. He's a writer, friend, and he's the author of, I'm not sure I'm going to get the full alliteration in here. He's the author of Racism, Revenge, and Ruin. It's All Obama. Well, how dare you? We'll start with
the title is not subtle. We did not intend on subtlety when we put the title and the cover together. And part of that is it's descriptive, right? The effect that Barack Obama has had on America is not subtle. Some of the workings to produce that effect were subtle in their way at the time, so others were not. But the fundamental transformation that Barack Obama has foisted on this country is anything but subtle. And so we wanted to smack people over the head with both the cover and the title of the book.
Yeah, I'll pop it up here for a second so people can see. So there it is in fire engine red. Racism, Revenge, and Ruin. And is that Ray Charles on the cover now?
It's Obama, but he's doing his Ray Charles impression with the shades for sure.
Yeah. So, I was in the green room. We were talking about like what world war we're on right now. Whether it's World War III or World War IV with all the kind of outbreaks. And World War III would have been the Cold War, but nobody really counts that. What Obama term are we on right now?
Well, you could make the argument. The argument actually is that this is Obama's third term. That Joe Biden is essentially a puppet of Barack Obama's, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about that a little bit in this interview. I think maybe the bigger argument is that this is Obama's fourth term because, and I have a whole chapter in the book about this. I mean, Donald Trump was president and he did the best he could, but there was a shadow government in place that Obama had put there. And Trump found himself throttled pretty much at every turn when he tried to make substantive changes to policy. A lot of times he was successful, but at the end of the day, and it was reported in the latter part of Trump's term and beginning of Biden's that there were 5,000 people that Obama had embedded into the bureaucracy whose job was to throttle anything that Trump did. And of course, the way this played out, obviously, was the Trump-Russia thing that ate up 2 years of Trump's term with the Mueller investigation. And then, of course, you saw with COVID and the response to COVID within the federal bureaucracy, and particularly at the higher end of the public health bureaucracy. As much political maneuvering as actual healthcare. When you had people like Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx made Donald Trump look like a fool every chance they could, when had he been given much more of a benefit of the doubt in the analysis, you wouldn't have had reporting of things like, oh, Trump told everybody to inject bleach, which was a lie. Or Trump had people eating fish tank cleaner to try to defeat COVID. That was clearly a political attack on a duly elected president. And then, of course, the final, coup de grace was 50 intelligence community spooks openly lying and saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. Okay, this stuff doesn't happen in an honest, federal bureaucracy that's not basically corrupted into a deep state. And Obama built the deep state was already existing, but Obama rebuilt the deep state along the lines of the woke DEI, ESG, globalist, I'd say communist agenda, and really radicalized the federal government to an extent that had not been seen prior to his coming along. So much so that, every aspect of federal intelligence and law enforcement will now tell you that white supremacists are the number one terrorist threat in America. And there aren't a whole lot of incidents that would prove that, whereas there are plenty of incidents proving that other forces are much more destructive and dangerous to the health and well-being of the American people. And that's just, it's political and it's aggressive and it's Obama.
Can we blame Candy Crowley for that?
Oh, you mean the famous question in the 2012 presidential debate to Mitt Romney?
Yeah. Now, I mean, that might not seem pertinent, but my feeling is that one term of Jimmy Carter, one term of Barack Obama, okay, bad enough, and Mitt Romney should have been the Reagan recovery, and to use one of your terms, kind of the revival. And I think that was a seminal. I mean, every election is the most important election ever, but that was kind of a seminal moment in 1980, and I think it was a seminal moment in 2012. And I think we can lay it squarely at the feet of Candy Crowley if she can find them. And that second term was somewhat of a gift. His ratings were so low. What happened at that moment in 2012? I mean, it wasn't just Candy Crowley. I think it was kind of, as we see later, Mitt Romney's own defects. But did you see that as a seminal moment the way I do?
Well, I think that giving Obama a second term to consolidate the, to go back to that same term, fundamental transformation of the country. Obama's second term was hyper aggressive when it came to weaponizing the federal government against the American people. Whether it was a surveillance state, and if you'll recall, this is all of the Cheryl Atkinson, James Rosen stuff, where they were actively trying to intimidate investigative reporters. Some of that had happened in the first term. What they did to Cheryl Atkinson in the wake of the Fast and Furious scandal, for example, was atrocious, but it only got worse. And so there was that. Certainly, you had the attempt to purge the military, which under Biden has become, that's gone into hyperdrive. So the loss of that election by the Republican Party was, catastrophic for the country. What I would say is the 2012 election was the end of what I call Bush Republicanism. Republican establishment, kind of corporatist, socially moderate, passive politics on the Republican side, which Mitt Romney was a perfect avatar for in the wake, particularly in the wake of the Bushes, who no longer can get elected in America. Obama killed Bush Republicanism, and Obama Democrats are the perfect foil for Bush Republicanism because they're willing to do things that Bush Republicans are not willing to counter. Trump Republicans, on the other hand, are willing to counter it, which is why, and I'm not going to make a big, Donald Trump as savior of the country argument. I can make it. I'm just not going to make it here. And it's not the argument you think, but the style of America First conservatism that Trump ushered into being, which is, I would argue, and I do in my previous book, The Revivalist Manifesto, the manifestation of a movement that has been kind of cycling into American politics again and again and again for really 40-something years now. I mean, the movement was really Reagan's populist conservative movement in the late 70s, 1980. And then it was also Newt Gingrich's Contract with America movement in 1994. And then it was the Tea Party in 2009 and 2010. And then it has sort of resurfaced as the MAGA movement. But really, I think it's bigger, older, and wider than Trump. And you see a lot of Generation X politicians who probably starting in 2008 are going to really reshape the party when Trump is out of the way. Because that movement won't accept the things that Obama Democrats are putting into place in the country, whether it's transgenderism or third wave feminism, DEI, these kinds of things. I think, my generation grew up in a time when things like that were not possible. And my generation, generally, at least the Republicans and conservatives and independents in my generation, have no interest whatsoever in this far left, woke corporatist agenda that Barack Obama put in place. So, yeah, I would say 2012 was really the death of Bush Republicanism, and then 2016 was sort of the resurgence of that movement under Trump's banner. And really, I think it's quite possible that Bush Republicanism would have died in 2008, and the Tea Party would have been what replaced it on the Republican side. But if you'll remember, the Tea Party didn't make it to 2012 as a functional political movement, largely because of what Obama did.
Yeah.
Once they, Tea Party people won the 2010 midterm elections, they sicked the IRS on all of the Tea Party groups and essentially put them out of business. And that was the reason that the Republican establishment with Romney was able to dominate the 2012 primary cycle on the GOP side.
Yeah, no, this for some reason I love this joke. It's a slightly, only very slightly related, but somebody tries to set up a date between a masochist and a sadist and figures they'll be the perfect blind date. And they get together, and finally, when push comes to shove, the masochist says, hurt me, and the sadist says, no. But
Right.
I only bring that joke up because it seems to me that what we have is two parties. We have the sadist party and the masochist party. And the masochist, I mean, I'll let you figure out which is which. But
right.
One party is willing to do it to the other one, and the other one is maybe, I don't know, enjoys it or whatever. But it's not even, without even the hope of consummation from the joke. But the lesson learned, I think, from the IRS episode, lowest learner. If we become the lowest learner of this episode, is that they got away with it, and they do it over and over again. So the sadist party is able to do this stuff, and the masochist party just takes it. I don't know whether they enjoy it or not, but nothing happened. By the time there's an old expression, it's attributed to Mark Twain, but everyone knows this one, that lies go around the world before the truth gets its pants on, and it seems to me that the provocative acts happen over and over again, whether it's the Christopher Steele, the whole Russia gate stuff, the fusion GPS, whatever it is, whatever the
Russia hoax.
And then we come up with a Durham report or a Mueller report or whatever, and by the time it's out, it's like everyone's already moved on, and the perpetrators have posted CNN or MSNBC or whatever.
And you can't prosecute any of the people responsible for that because they have to go in front of a DC jury that's all Democrats that'll never convict any of them, right? Like, I mean, Durham had these people cold, couldn't do anything about it. But that's of a piece, right? I mean, I think one of the things that Obama and his crew figured out along the way was we can get away with this. Nobody's going to do anything to stop us. So when they run Fast and Furious, which, on the right, we talk about worse than Watergate like all the time. And we're right every time we talk about it, right? But like everything now is worse than Watergate. And at the end of the day, I mean, essentially Watergate was hacking into the other guy's database. Essentially, that's what it is. And you must assume that both parties do that to each other all the time now, right? Like you must assume that. If they aren't doing that, then what the hell is wrong with these people? Fast and Furious, as scandals go, is breathtaking. Okay, like it's breathtaking. These guys walk guns across the border to Mexican drug cartels, hoping for a body count that they could then monetize politically to get gun control. Like that is literally what Fast and Furious was about. And hundreds of people died, including a couple of federal. One guy was an ICE agent and the other guy was Border Patrol. Died as a result of these guns that go. And so Congress starts investigating it when the Republicans take over after the 2010 elections. And Eric Holder basically shoots in the middle finger. What are you going to do about it? Like they stonewalled everything when they found out everything about Fast and Furious. Eric Holder wouldn't even come testify. So I'm going to go to hell. All right. So what do? Well, the guy's obviously in contempt of Congress. And so what happens? Nothing. They find him in contempt of Congress and he's still testifying to Congress. Nobody puts him in the jail under the building. Okay, like he still testifying, like he's in contempt of Congress, and they still get him to testify, and he shows up with this arrogant, what are you going to do about it type of thing, right? And here's Peter Navarro all these years later, right, for contempt of Congress when he has a legitimate executive privilege defense to not having to come and testify about the January 6th stuff. And there's no documentation that Peter Navarro did anything at all that was untoward. And he's going to spend 90 days in jail for contempt of Congress while Eric Holder is free to do whatever the hell he wants. I'll build on something else that sort of underlies this, which is that the Republican Party and really the just kind of traditional America has gone soft and is not willing to impose consequences on people for bad actions, particularly when those people are not, traditional criminals. And this has metastasized and started maybe politically and then has kind of pervaded into the legal system. Several decades ago, the Democrats in cities figured out that if you trash a place, okay, it actually is good for politics. I call this weaponized governmental failure. All right. And what it basically means is this: if you have a city and you do all of the basic governmental functions of a city well, right? If you fill the potholes, and if the trash is picked up on time, and if the snow is shoveled off the streets, and if the cops keep the criminals at bay, if the schools actually educate kids, what you are going to get out of that is a whole lot of middle-class people, right? Middle-class people will move in. Poor people will elevate themselves and become middle-class. And this is a horrible result for Democrats who run cities, because middle-class people provide you a nice tax base, a livable city, businesses can launch and do well in a place, and all of that's fine. But they actually expect you to fill the potholes. They actually expect the schools to be halfway decent. They expect when they call the cops, it doesn't take 90 minutes for the cops to get there, right? Like they expect these things. And those are a pain in the ass to provide if you're an urban Democrat, because if you're using the pothole money to fill the potholes, there's no money for graft. How are you going to steal the pothole money when you have to fill potholes with it, right? And so what they figured out a few decades ago is that if you refuse to do these things and you let the city go to seed, okay, before you start losing elections, these middle-class people who are the only ones that would turn you out of office, they move to the suburbs. And so increasingly you get this electorate that's a thin skim of rich people who don't really care, because rich people can get pretty much a la carte all of the government services that you're supposed to provide. Like their kids go to private schools. They got private security in their neighborhood. They max out a donation to the mayor. So they pick up the phone and say, hey, I got a pothole in front of my house. That pothole gets filled. Okay. So you can manage the rich. And the poor, you can give them midnight basketball, right? Like the poor they don't know. You knock down a statue and the poor think you're doing something. Middle-class people, they're all in the suburbs and they can't vote you out. So the electorate gets more and more hard left, and you can completely refuse to govern and you're unbeatable. Look at Chicago, right? Like Chicago goes from the frying pan of Lori Lightfoot to the fire of Brandon Johnson. And it's based on the city of Chicago doing nothing to provide basic social services. The place is completely fallen apart, but there's nobody to vote him out of office. And so when you start with weaponized governmental failure, and then you have somebody like Obama who comes from that very political tradition, and he gets in the White House, and what he realizes is we can do anything we want and no one will stop us. And so what you have seen since January 2009, is an ever metastasizing, weaponized government, which goes all out to do things that most people would look at and go, oh, they'll never do that. That's political suicide. It's insane. You can't do that. Well, they're doing it, and they've proceeded to do it because they look at the Republicans on Capitol Hill. They look at the Senate Republicans, who are totally compromised by the deep state and the military-industrial complex and whatever, and the sort of disorganization of the Republicans on the House side. And they say, there's no congressional oversight here at all. We can do whatever we want. And so if it's purging all the patriots out of the military by using the COVID vaccine as the means to do it, or calling them white supremacists, fine, we'll do that. We'll build a military that is the kind of third world crap force that you can sick on the people of a country, because all the patriots who would refuse have gotten drummed out, right? And so you have people like, the Mark Milley's and Lloyd Austin's running the Defense Department, who, I wouldn't trust to preserve the Constitution in any way, shape, matter, or form. And then, of course, the FBI and the CIA and some of these other federal agencies, totally corrupted because there was nobody there to do anything about it.
Yeah, that's. I think you got it. The recipe for disaster.
People see it. Okay, everybody sees this. Nobody knows what to do about it, but people recognize this because it's very recognizable, right? I mean, when you have practically every federal agency is at war with normal Americans, okay, whether it's the EPA that has just draped itself all over particularly small and mid-sized businesses in this country, or the judicial system, which is completely weaponized against people who are dissidents of this new kind of Obama Democrat style of governance. And Trump is the obvious case, but it's not just Trump, right? I mean, I look at a guy like Mark Houck, who was an abortion protester, who got into a scuffle with a guy who, went after his kid while they were doing sidewalk counseling. And they sent a SWAT team to this guy, right? And to come and arrest him, when the local government where he was decided, no, we're not going to prosecute this guy for a scuffle. So no, we got a federal law that we're going to prosecute you under, and we're going to send a half a dozen guys with, full combat gear to your house at 4:00 in the morning to come take you away with your wife and kids screaming, right? Like, they're sending the FBI after Catholics who go to Latin mass. These things are insane. They were like 20 years ago, you'd look at this, that would never happen in America. Now it barely raises eyebrows. And that's just how far this thing has gone.
So I'd like to segue to the book a little bit. I'm enjoying it. I wonder, maybe you could start at the beginning and Obama's beginnings. And basically, he kind of had not quite the upbringing I had, but I wound going to a kind of an elite high school, middle school / high school, prep school, or whatever. So did he. I went to Yale, and there were people in my school from what do they name that place, Punahou or something like that.
Punahou, yeah.
He grew up in a white household with his grandparents and so forth. But there's other forces at play, and I think you kind of limned the kind of Franklin Marshall Davis underpinnings, and whether it's genetic or just by application of how Obama grew up, through this kind of this red diaper thing. What was the appeal of communism for his mom, his grandparents, Davis, so forth? How does that all play out, and how does it play out in his kind of his upbringing?
Well, I can't really comment on why his grandparents and his mom would have been the hardcore lefties that they were. They were, like in the late 50s, early 60s, you had a certain a certain counterculture in the country that these people were part of, that was left. But where Obama comes along, and sort of the red diaper piece to Obama, is this guy, and it may have been that he didn't have a choice, that he was put in front of these people really all along his life. His mom marries this guy Lolo Soetoro, who's an Indonesian, and ended up being a guy that did fairly well. He had a government job, and then he worked for an oil company. And essentially, this kid is 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, and Soetoro is telling him basically American dream type stuff. Right? Hey, you need to work hard, and you're going to do well if you do this. It wasn't even in America; it was in Indonesia. His mom didn't like that messaging, and so she sent him to go live with his grandparents back in Hawaii. Right? So she sends him to America, so that he would maybe get a less American upbringing than he was getting with an Indonesian that worked for an American oil company. It's a weird deal, but he's 10 years old. His grandfather decides to bring him around Frank Marshall Davis periodically the entire rest of the time that Obama lives in Hawaii. And this is a very strange decision to make. And of course, the justification for it, at least what we're given in Dreams from My Father, which is sort of the origin myth story that Obama draped around himself, is he needs an African American role model. Right. He needs to have black mentors in his life. Okay. So it was pretty well known that Frank Marshall Davis was a communist, Soviet asset who had been on the FBI's security directorate list. He was also a amateur photographer whose specialty was in photographing naked women, one of whom happened to be Obama's mother. Okay, so this is I'm giving you secondhand history here because I don't have any personal knowledge of this. But before Playboy and Penthouse magazine came along, the way that porn was distributed was through mail order catalogs. Like you would get it on a catalog, you would order a collection of photographs that would show up in the mail, and then you would have nudie pictures. Well, Frank Marshall Davis was one of the suppliers of those pictures. And one of his subjects was Ann Dunham, Obama's mother. Okay. And Joel Gilbert, who did a lot of amazing research on this, uncovered this stuff. And Gilbert makes the case that Frank Marshall Davis was actually Obama's biological father. And that actually does make a lot of sense. If you look at side by side pictures of Barack Obama Sr., Barack Obama, and Frank Marshall Davis, it's impossible not to come to the conclusion that Obama's looks a lot more like Davis than he does Obama Sr. But I'm not going to make the argument per se that Obama is Davis's biological son. He's his intellectual and ideological son. They brought Barack Obama around to see Frank Marshall Davis for those 8 formative years of his life. And Davis appears in Dreams from My Father 22 times, only as Frank, not Frank Marshall Davis, but it's clear he's Frank Marshall Davis. Those references were pulled from the audiobook version of Dreams from My Father, which came out later when Obama was a national political figure at that point and a potential presidential candidate. They scrubbed Frank Marshall Davis out. You can find columns that Frank Marshall Davis wrote for the Chicago Star and the Honolulu Record, the communist newspapers that he worked for. And they are blisteringly anti-American. And also, what's more specifically true is that they foisted a never-ending critique on this country that it is incurably racist and therefore unjust, and very much attacks the concept of all men are created equal that the country's founded on. It doesn't, like, Davis didn't take the argument that Martin Luther King did, for example, which is, we should be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. Davis's perspective was none of that is possible, because the system of free market enterprise and individual freedom and individualism in this country is incurably weighted against the black man. And so the only way black people in America could ever get a fair shake is through a socialist or communist system. So this is the sort of formative mentor of Obama through his, kind of preteen and teen years. Then he goes off to college, and as he notes in Dreams from My Father, he's a committed Marxist at this point. But he runs into other mentors. For example, and there's four major ones, with Davis being the first. There's Derek Bell, who is the founder of critical race theory, who was Obama's mentor at Harvard Law School. Obama's connection to Bell really didn't get a lot of media play. If you'll recall, back in 2012, it was just before he died, Andrew Breitbart uncovered video of Obama speaking out at a campus rally for Derek Bell, who was, I guess, quitting at Harvard because they weren't hiring enough black law professors. And Breitbart was like, look, this is Obama with critical race theory. Like, this is what's going on. And of course, everybody laughed at Breitbart for doing it. Well, nobody's really laughing about this anymore. So Derek Bell was number two. Then number three would have been Bill Ayers, who actually, by all indications, was the ghostwriter for Dreams from My Father. And Obama did everything he could to minimize Ayers as an influence. But he clearly was much, much more than anybody gave credit for. Bill Ayers turns out to be one of the most important and influential thinkers on American educational design that there is, ever since Obama became president. Okay. All of this stuff, turning K-12 schools into woke indoctrination factories, springs from Bill Ayers and from projects that Bill Ayers pioneered in Chicago with Obama's help in a lot of cases. And we talk about that a good bit in the book. And then, of course, the other one is Reverend Wright, who is the one mentor of the four that everybody talks about. Now, all four of these guys have something in common. I mean, obviously, they're hardcore leftists, but they all four have this critique of America, that it is fundamentally a racist country. And so Barack Obama's entire upbringing, both as a kid and also upbringing as a political figure, is based on this notion that this country and this society is irredeemably racist and has to be torn down and rebuilt from the ground up, which is where you get the fundamental transformation of the country.
Now, there's an old joke. Two data scientists walk down the street. I'm rehashing all my jokes for you. And one says to the other, hey, how are you? And the other one says, compared to what?
Right.
To call this country racist, well, fine, but compared to what? I mean, everywhere else, if you're a black guy or white guy in China, there are going to be issues. We have many homogenous societies, and they were basically created by wars.
This is the least racist country on earth. Okay. I mean, every other country in the world was founded, at least to some degree, on racism.
Yeah,
Turkey was founded for the Turks to have a place to live, to the exclusion of everyone else. Ditto for France. Ditto for Somalia. I mean, like, ethnic and racial strife is what created the world map as it is. We're the only country that was founded on an ideal that surpasses race, and we've done really more than anybody else in terms of blood and treasure spent to try to realize that vision. And really, what you have is people like Obama who have abused the fact that the American people desperately want to be be able to say, hey, look, we accomplished what we set out to do in terms of making a colorblind society. I mean, he presented himself as a racial healer in 2008 when he ran for president. I mean, that was in June of every year, Gallup does a survey of race relations in America. Okay. And 2007 was the zenith of positive race relations in this country. Something like 74% of people across racial lines said race relations in America were good and getting better. Okay. Obama comes along, and the value proposition of his candidacy was this can't be a racist country if it elects a black guy president. Okay. It was the greatest political bait and switch in American history. All right. No sooner did he get in office, he began using race as a wedge that he could drive through the country and keep people so focused on that they could do all of these other things that they desperately wanted to do. And of course, race was also a crutch. Any criticism, I mean, if you criticized Obamacare, mate, you're a racist. You only care about this because a black man is doing it. And it's like, that has nothing to do with race. You're redesigning healthcare to make it look like a communist system, and we don't want that. Well, you'd want it fine if it was a white guy. And those arguments were actually made.
Yeah, I think that's why Eric Holder didn't show up. You know, there's a comedian actually from Louisiana, Mark Normand. It's Norman with a D at the end. And I don't know if you've heard his stuff, but he's kind of catching the world on fire. He's really, really funny. And he has a joke. I'm not going to get it right. I apologize. But basically, late at night, that scenario that I think Juan Williams and Jesse Jackson both cop to, that they personally worry about a black guy, on a dark street. Where, anyway, the situation for the joke is, if you're a black guy and this black guy kind of you can cross the street, no problem. But if you're a white guy, you see black guy behind you, you have to not cross the street because you're more scared about racism than getting
mugged. Yeah.
Getting mugged. And I think that's where the Republican Party is, this kind of this magical thing that they figured out. This ism stuff is a magic potion. It's better than anything in Harry Potter. Mind you, Rowling could use some of this stuff herself if she could conjure up some of those potions, because this ism stuff. You're a TERF. You're a racist. You're a transphobe. All these phobias and isms are like magic. They're Harry Potter level spells that people just become immobilized, incapacitated, and they can't do the right thing. They can't see it through the Martin Luther King lens.
Right. Well, they're spells that work on weak people. And hopefully what will happen, and hopefully one of the things that Obama unwittingly is teaching us as a country, is that there's nothing magical to this. I would call it cancel culture. And I mean, we could get into the long discussion of this Herbert Marcuse and the repressive tolerance. I mean, this guy wrote an entire book about, okay, here's what we do. We demand tolerance of our ideas. And when that's given and we get enough power, then we can start repressing their ideas. The guy literally put that out. And the left has used it as a playbook ever since. And I mean, we're talking 1965 here that this stuff was written down, and it becomes cancel culture, 45, 50 years later. But the whole point of this is you don't have to accept it. Refuse to be canceled. And, we don't want to do that because that means fighting with people, and nobody likes to fight if you don't have to. Well, if they want to call you a racist, or the best thing ever is, you're a transphobe. And it's like, you're damn right I am. I don't like crazy people, and I don't want them around me. Okay. It's like, well, that's a mean thing to say. And it's like, have you seen these folks? A lot of us have lost the ability to call a thing what it is. And it's because to call a thing what it is often to put one at risk of being called judgmental or mean or whatever. And the fact of the matter is, there are much worse things in life than all of these appellations and these accusations that they want to make to you. I'll even say it. there are worse things than being a racist. Like, for example, I think being a pedophile is worse than being a racist. And it seems like there are a lot more pedophiles involved in this movement that's part of Obama's crowd than maybe there should be. And so
my old joke is that if you're a conservative in a liberal area, that you're better off telling people you're a pedophile, and then once the hard way is off, you say actually you kind of inured them to the fact that no, it's actually worse. I'm a Republican.
Right.
You kind of
that's too far.
So it's kind of a funny thing, but I actually I don't like. I think transphobia is kind of begging the question, although people don't really know what that means anymore. You're putting in something that you're not phobic, and then you have to accept this concept of trans. I don't think humans can trans. I think you can do surgery, and you can do woman face, and you can do woman body face, I guess. You can mutilate yourself. It's an impossibility to become something that you can't become. You can't be if people all of a sudden want to be penguins, and you think that's weird, you're not a penguin phobe because they're not ipso facto penguins to begin with, and you're not phobic either. It's like I chose the traditional route of marrying a woman, and we have kids, and it happened without our actual planning per se. Stuff happens because that's how pretty much everybody I know got here. And so it's like, but to talk about these things, you're making these formulations that are once I kind of think once you accept them, you've lost the argument. I was watching a Megyn Kelly or listening maybe a year or so. This was with the Riley Gaines, what I like to call William Thomas, and bracket just the LIA in the middle. That's apparently the only thing he cut off was the WIL and the M at the end.
Exactly.
And just that was the only actual surgical excision that occurred. And but so she had a panel of we'll call them, just for argument's sake, we'll call them women, and they were previous Olympic winners and athletes, and on the level of Navratilova, whatever. But it wasn't she anyway. And they're all going on and on about what's wrong with the situation. And they're like, well, she shouldn't have raced with Riley Gaines, and she shouldn't have done this. And they're talking about William Thomas.
Right.
And it's like,
why are you calling her she?
Dude, ask this, whatever you want. You cannot win this argument when you've already accepted that William Thomas is a woman. Why, you've kind of like swallowed the bait and the hook. And this seems to be something that is happening again over and over again. It's, again, I don't know if the masochist and sadist joke, but it seems to me that one party is always doing this stuff. The other one always has to take it.
Right.
And, they have the insurrection at Trump's inauguration, and what's up with that? Nothing. And then
millions of dollars worth of damage, and people got hurt, and practically nobody was arrested. And then you had a peaceful protest on January 6th, at least mostly peaceful. And what wasn't peaceful might very well have been sort of an agent provocateur type situation with federal involvement. That I think is pretty clear. There's a lot of that. Yeah. And you've got to militarize Capitol Hill at that point, with razor wire and National Guardsmen, which, I don't know if these guys realized the optics of what they were doing. It looked an awful lot like a coup d'etat had just been executed in that Capitol.
Good use of the word executed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the first of Donald Trump's absurd impeachment was I'm not a Freudian necessarily anymore, but I think it's projection. I mean,
everything about the Democrats is projection. That's exactly the correct word. Trump got impeached for investigating corruption. That's what that was. It was all about, hey, it looks like there was a bribe.
Not only that, but he was investigating what was prescient. As I have a older attorney friend who used to tell me, local government is your best corruption dollar value. Getting back to we're talking about with the cities, and if you're a wealthy person, you can get something done, so forth. But I actually push back on that, because I think quasi-presidential corruption dollar is your best corruption dollar value. Grafting the VP or grafting the president in not the surgical term, but giving graft. Those Ukraine, whatever they have, rubles or dollars, whatever, that was very well spent money, for Hunter Biden and so forth, because the return on investment, I don't even know how many zeros come after the one that we've sent over to Ukraine as a result, for a war that, was it the worst thing? I mean, again, Biden kind of invited it. Obama allowed it previously. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Well, I mean, what I would say is the corrupt elite of Ukraine have made out exceptionally well during this war. The people of Ukraine have been devastated, and many of them have just picked up and left Ukraine as a result. The country of that country is utterly destroyed. Probably 2 years ago, we should have been at the peace table to finish that thing, because ultimately it's going to be decided at the peace table. Okay. I mean, it's a stalemate of a war, unless it's a total, battle of attrition and there just aren't any Ukrainian soldiers left to stop the Russians from marching into Kiev. I don't even think that's what Putin wants.
No.
So why haven't you made peace? Well, the answer is because people are making money off of this thing. And I think there is a nexus here between the money that Biden has pulled in from these people, Victoria Nuland, and some of these nonprofit groups that are, based in K Street, but provide humanitarian aid across the world. And then you've got the military-industrial complex involved. I think there's a lot of people profiteering off of this thing, and they'll go on milking Ukraine until there is no Ukraine left. And the elite in Ukraine were more than happy to do that to their own people, which, if you look at the history of the place, is not that surprising. Okay, I mean, that part of the world has a long history of, the big guys screwing everybody else.
Well, I think that's the world writ large. I mean, you can go to the Congo, see the same thing, and go to, Myanmar.
We're supposed to be an exception to that.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, we're finding out that we're not really an exception.
Well, I think there's two ways of getting ahead in the world historically. There's rape, pillage, conquering, taking over, and that's pretty much humans 1.0. And then there's humans 2.0, which is we are going to cooperate and we're going to build something together, and we're not going to go to war with each other, because our sharing knowledge will affect better attitudes for both of us. I think the concept, I mean, you're a former sports guy. George Gilder, whom I've had on a couple times, is brilliant, in his 80s now. He wrote Life After Capitalism, which hint is capitalism, but Life After Google, Life After he's got a whole series of books. But basically, every trade produces value for both parties. And so, anyway, so I'm sure you've heard of the McDonald's theory of war, which is that no two countries, both of which had McDonald's, had ever gone to war with each other. I'm not sure that's still operative after.
It was definitely true at one point. I don't know.
Yeah,
that it's true
it was true at one. And so that speaks to a greater truth, which is that this cooperation thing, if we both buy into kind of this European unionization, that we're all going to, share borders, kumbaya, we're not going to go, we're going to share commerce. And frankly, I'm not a big EU guy based on some of their kind of quasi-dictatorial monarchical aspects and so forth. And I think they took the concept of a common currency to a common government too far. Anyway, but that is the way it is emblematic that you can cross these borders, Schengen, whatever they had called it, zones and so forth, and everything's easy. And it has taken a babel of different languages, put them together, and everyone's kind of all happy, and they see themselves as European. Fine. But it hasn't worked at other places yet, because it hasn't gotten there. So that might be kind of the positive endpoint. But anyway, let's. I don't know if you want to comment on that, or let's go back.
At some point, hopefully fairly soon, I am going to write a book on exactly what you just said, and the title of it is going to be Villagers and Pillagers, right?
Oh my God,
it's the two ways of getting ahead of the world. Like there's,
I have the title for you.
You can create value, right? And whether it's a trade that benefits both sides, or you're a butcher, baker, a candlestick maker, whatever. And then there's the Mongols who show up on horseback with swords and torches, and they steal all the stuff in the village, and they cart the women and children off as slaves. I mean, civilization is supposed to make it easier to be a villager than a pillager.
Yeah,
the problem is that the villagers figure out how to get around civilization. Now you don't necessarily have a sword and a horse. It's a law degree and it's a nonprofit and a lobbyist that you use.
Well, and it's a matter of technique. I mean, I was going to say I have a single frame cartoon of Genghis Khan. It takes a pillage, but
yeah,
but there is this kind of aspect where you can do these things for good or evil, and so there's lawfare versus adequate arbitrage and figuring things out. I mean, lawyers can be productive despite all the jokes. I've gotten a lot of benefit from having lawyers divide up things appropriately and keeping people from doing worse. People don't like nationalism. They don't like thisism, that, but nationalism beats tribalism, and a lot of nationalism happened through lawyering and through, putting proper boundaries and making, giving people what they want. I think this is kind of a very innate aspect to people, which, I only, I maybe knew this, but I saw this, I learned it through watching Tiny Frogs. There's a quick little video, 4 frogs or toads, and they're all, they're like each corner, and the human like drops a worm there, and they're all kind of looking at each other, and there's like a Mexican standoff, and
right, who's gonna go get the worm?
And then one guy goes, he grabs the worm, and then they attack him. Now, because it wasn't fair. Now there was no opportunity for fairness. But I've had multiple dogs at different times. Two dogs. Once we had 3 dogs, and they, even in their dog level, if you put the piece of food down, one dog grabs it, but the next piece of food, the other guy who just got one does not get. This is almost uniform. They understand this fairness doctrine, and not the one for public TV, whatever. But so everyone really wants to get fairness. And even all this stuff about equity and whatnot is all about fairness, but it's misapplied because I think they're running on the wrong statutes of what ultimately will be fair to everybody. And this is kind of a philosophy which I'm not good at. Let's see. So you got villagers and pillagers. I don't know. We're kind of rounding out the hour. I want people to go buy your book, so I'm going to pop it up again so people can see it. And notwithstanding the kind of we'll call it Joe Biden background red of anger, what's your kind of major thrust from this, and what are the learning points, and what did you take away from researching it?
Well, I took a ton away from researching it, but I guess to answer your question the best way I can, the point of reading the book, and I think what I hope people will learn from reading this is that the changes to the country and the changes in society, cultural, political, economic, that have happened over the last 15 or 20 years, which are profound, okay? The temptation is to believe that these are organic, that this is just sort of societal evolution. Technology has changed the way we do business and, all these different kind of things. And this is sort of just how things have evolved. That's not true. The book goes into example after example of how these things were contrived and executed. And Obama has been the most important influence on American society, cultural, political, economic, over the last 15 or 20 years. So in other words, this stuff is man-made. It's not just the way things evolved. And because it's man-made, it can be unmade by man. And what people need to understand is if you have enough determination and you have a clear enough vision of where you want to go, which for most of us, I think, would be to a return to the America of, say, the late 80s and early 90s, where you were far more moored in a sense of national pride, civic responsibility, and other things. So we've already got a model that works that we can return to. And we just need to drag the country back to that and reject Obama Democrats and the people that he's bringing on. And of course, you're pulling up my previous political book, The Revivalist Manifesto, which talks a great deal about that exact subject. And I guess I'll leave with this. It's sort of a larger argument. One of the things in the Revivalist Manifesto that sort of frames this historical discussion is a notion first put forth by James Pearson, who's a great academic and philanthropist. Pearson wrote a couple of decades ago that America has gone through three specific political revolutions that led to changes in political history and eras. The first being Jefferson's Revolution of 1800, when he beat John Adams in that election, and essentially created antebellum America. Okay, and that lasted until about 1860, with Lincoln's election then, and began the Civil War. The country that came out of that was, deeply capitalistic. It was a Republican-dominated era. You embraced technology, and it was like real upward spiral in the quality of life. But the institutions that were built around that Gilded Age collapsed under the weight of urbanization and a few other things. And you had another revolution in 1932, which was, the FDR and the beginning of the New Deal, which then turned into World War II, post-war society, the Great Society, and so forth. Pearson's argument is that we haven't had the fourth revolution yet, but it's coming. And I think that is, that was certainly one of the major themes in the Revivalist Manifesto that I picked up on and talked about it and said, hey, look, either we're going to have an America dominated by hardcore communists, or conservatives are going to have to become revivalists and get better at this stuff. And when they do, they can kick off that fourth era, which will be a pro-freedom, pro-Republican, pro-capitalistic era. The problem is it's possible that we might have already had the fourth revolution, and it happened in 2008.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that.
Yeah, that's the you don't know these things until later. The problem is if the revolution happened in 2008 and elections become a sham, and you just have a disintegration of all of the the civil society and the civic goods that you're trying to distribute through government and through other institutions, and all of that just kind of goes away, and you become a sort of woke totalitarian dystopia. And I think a lot of people are afraid that is what we're becoming. But my message is, I don't think it has to be that way. Fight back and retake your country from these people.
All right. Well, with that, people can follow you on Twitter, and you also write for the American Spectator. Yeah, and you have a novel coming out serialized.
Yeah. There's this weekend, the 9th of 10 episodes of King of the Jungle will appear at spectator.org, and then next month it's getting published at Amazon as a full length novel. So it's been a lot of fun to write King of the Jungle. It's a very satirical look at a scenario that might actually happen. Which is the Venezuelans invading Guyana. But in the novel, there's a red-pilled billionaire who's built a little of a Shangri-La in the jungles of Guyana, and he decides to fight rather than to pick up and leave when the Venezuelans come. And so it's a very much sort of in the style of a PJ O'Rourke or a Dave Barry or Ken Bias.
Yeah, good stuff. So before I leave, I'm going to, and we'll have final words. I just want to do a little shameless self-promotion. I have a single book on Amazon. It's called Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. I've got a couple other books in the offing on other topics, narcotic addiction, getting off narcotics, and one about how people misconceive the various diagnoses of cancer, and they kind of conflate it as one illness. And it's total sidelight, but people are always hunting for the cure for cancer, and they don't actually realize that it actually has. It's mostly been cured. I mean, it's like saying I want a cure for infectious disease. Well, you'll never cure infectious disease. People are still getting colds and cough, but we don't see people dropping dead from tuberculosis the same way we did. So cancer has in large part been cured, but people don't really know because they don't have the terms with which to discuss the topic. So I've got a book pretty much written on that, and hopefully that'll get out. But the interesting one was this Zika affair, and I'm not going to talk about it too much here, except maybe you were in tropical Louisiana, and it was a phenomenon. It was there in Brazil mostly, Zika causing microcephaly supposedly, and it became a worldwide frou-for-all, pandemic, panic, whatnot, and it's never recurred. But the money has not stopped flowing, and the research is still there. And there's a whole industry of people who were convinced Zika caused microcephaly. And I'm kind of the emperor's, I'm the kid in the emperor's new clothes, and I keep yelling around, but no, I can't get a lecture at a university. I can't get anybody with credentials to even sneeze on my book, which in case I collect their infectious diseases. But it's just a hilarious thing because it's so obvious that this thing never really, Zika is a real virus, and microcephaly is a real phenomenon. So I'm not a conspiracy guy, but it just never one had anything to do with the other. And it still doesn't, and it hasn't recurred anywhere on Earth, including Northeast Brazil. And even in Brazil, you can't convince anybody it didn't happen. The causation is not there. What happened. But it was one of these things that people took to use your phrase. They took a hayride on this because it was a way of overturning the abortion constraints in Latin America. And so the WHO and a lot of NGOs went on. They totally leapt on this thing, and it's kind of an Obamization. If that's a word, they basically civil activized this Zika microcephaly thing so they could get rid of abortion, and so it became a huge political thing. And so there's a lot of political aspects to the book. I try to make it, for the layperson, it's not really a medical book, but it's a funny thing. Anyway, I recommend people go buy it if they need a reminder. It's called Overturning Zika, and then you can keep me, from becoming destitute. Actually, that's not really a worry, but anyway, so there you have it. Any final words, Scott?
Well, just look, check out Racism, Revenge, and Ruin anywhere that books are available, Amazon being a good place to start. And on April 12th, make sure to check out King of the Jungle when it appears. It's actually available for pre-order now, but on the 12th of April, it'll be out.
Will I be able to get my copy signed?
Sure, we can do that.
All right. Well, I'll do a vice versa with you. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye to everybody else.